But I really did it because I believe in women's health equity. And if we don't do it, it becomes clearer every single day. If we don't do it, if we don't make our voices heard, if we don't take the initiative, it won't be done for us, even though we still represent more than half 50% of the world's population.
Welcome to Suburban Warrior, the podcast that will impact, inspire, and empower you to transform your mindset and become the badass warrior that you are. I'm your host and fellow warrior, Chrissy Pfeiffer, former clinician and corporate marketing exec turned multi-passionate entrepreneur, performance and life coach, and mom to 4 not-so-little warriors. Each week, I will bring you honest conversations with inspiring guests to share their stories of resilience, optimism, success, and simple yet effective strategies so that you transform your thoughts and change your behavior to get the results you want in your life. You will be empowered to take action, warrior up, and believe in you. Let's do this. What's up, warriors? Welcome back to another episode of the Suburban Warrior Podcast. I'm your host, Chrissy Pfeiffer, and I'm back again this week with another amazing suburban warrior here to share her story and expertise with us today. And I'm really excited about my guest because she has been an advocate for women's health really since in the last 30 years, and in the late 90s, she really started searching for healthcare solutions across many different therapeutic categories for women. And while she's been in the industry for over 30 years, she has been named People to Watch in 2024 by Philadelphia Magazine as just one of her many recognitions. But she has a real passion for women's healthcare. So let me introduce to you today Gerianne DiPiano. She serves as president and CEO of FemmePharma and is chairman of the board. A pharmaceutical industry executive and women's healthcare expert, Gerianne founded FemmePharma in 1999 in response to the industry's narrow focus on women's health needs, such as contraception and hormone replacement therapy, but lack of attention to other important women's diseases and disorders. Guided by her vision to provide more effective treatment options for women, FemmePharma is focused on improving women's health by developing prescription pharmaceuticals and over-the-counter products that are specifically designed for women across a broad range of therapeutic categories. So I cannot wait to talk about all of these things. Welcome to the podcast, Gerianne.
Thanks for inviting me. It's great to be here with you, Chrissy, and I know we share a common passion and mission, which is women and women's health care of all ages.
Absolutely. And we share the commonality of having the background in pharma and growing up in pharma. And I'm just really excited to hear from you about, your passion and your why, because, you went so far as to start a pharmaceutical company just for women so that we can have the resources that we so desperately need. And, again, this is something that you have been doing since the late 90s. And, so grateful for your passion and your why and why you're doing it. So tell my listeners a little bit more about you and why you do what you do.
So I think it was, I was mad as hell and I wasn't going to take it anymore.
Yes, I love it. That is awesome.
Enough is enough. I have a repertoire of music that goes along with the years that I spent in big pharma, then transitioning into my own small pharma company, but worked in the pharmaceutical industry for the earlier part of my career. And I worked with some of the giants like Bristol Myers Squibb and Sanofi Aventis and the company that's now known as Pfizer. And I have to say, I had a great career.
Yeah.
Learned a lot, worked with incredible mentors, had the opportunity to do a lot of international travel. So it was really positive experience. So I don't want to downgrade that experience.
Sure.
And during that period of time, there were two things that became glaringly apparent to me. Number one was the plight of women on many different levels.
Yeah.
So we've heard about the plight of women in terms of equity in general, and it was equal pay. equal standing, right?
Yes.
And that was a challenge in the multinational pharmaceutical companies, because although women did have a trajectory, it was a different trajectory than there was for a man.
Yes.
So you leave graduate school, you have all the honors. In fact, you have more degrees and more, of the alphabet soup behind your name than some of your male counterparts. But then you learn that you're making less. So that was one issue.
Right.
So, okay, where is the equity when a direct report makes less than I do, or makes more than I do, rather?
Right.
So that was one eye-opening moment. It's like, wait a minute, just because I have different reproductive organs, I'm being treated differently.
Yeah.
Then it was the ageism that we observed. So some of my colleagues who were older than I was, very accomplished women, put out to pasture, roles change, so you observe that. Think, why is this fair? Where's the equity? Why is there ageism? And we're not talking old women. We're talking women in their late 40s, early 50s. And let's not forget about women who were having kids.
Oh, yeah.
So there were so many things that I observed that were frustrating to me. But perhaps the biggest issue was the drugs that were being developed weren't necessarily being studied in women. Then in 1993, we were required to study these drugs in a female population, individuals that had female reproductive organs. Great news. Was it? Because things change as women transition from premenopausal, at the height of the reproductive years, through perimenopause and postmenopause. So we weren't disaggregating the data. Then let's not forget that if you were a woman of reproductive age, perhaps a drug wasn't clinically tested in you because of what I refer to as paternal benevolence. So we want to take care of our women. We want to make sure we protect them. Well, guess what? We didn't protect our women because we didn't know how drugs would behave in their bodies or how their bodies would respond to certain drugs. So we started seeing that. And then I did what I typically do when I'm looking at any market. And I said, what is the strategic quantification here? So if we were to do the A to Z in women's health care, so diseases and disorders that disproportionately or differently affect women, are we talking about a niche market? Well, it's one hell of a niche.
Yeah.
And I estimated at the time that if you added the A to Z, so things like autoimmune diseases, Alzheimer's, that's why I say it's the alphabet soup of women's health care. By my calculations way back when, it was over $100 billion globally. Pretty big market where to start. So there was that issue, and it was clear Big Pharma, because they were pursuing lots of different areas, all important, by the way. I'm not trying to indict Big Pharma because I think,
of course,
but there was so much opportunity and so much inequity that existed that I believed that I had a business.
Yeah.
Whereas then Venus had to go to Mars for funding.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit of the backstory, but I really did it because I believe in women's health equity. And if we don't do it, it becomes clearer every single day. If we don't do it, if we don't make our voices heard, if we don't take the initiative, it won't be done for us, even though we still represent more than half 50% of the world's population.
Right.
And more so as we age, because we tend to see our male counterparts pass earlier than we do.
Right.
So we represent a vast majority of the world's population, and we control 80%, 70 to 80% of the spending. So you have,
right.
How about
exactly.
that? We should be making these decisions for ourselves and for the types of products and services and all sorts of issues that impact us, whether it's child care or it's parental care. We should be making these decisions.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's so funny just hearing you talk about sort of the times of the late 90s and early 2000s, which is, exactly when I was in pharma up through about 2010. And it was, a definitely a different world, but it was so difficult, rising through the ranks, in the commercial. I was in sales and marketing and spent most of my time in marketing, but surrounded by all my colleagues were men. And of course, it was at the time when I was having babies. And it was unbelievable some of the things that were said to me, about having babies. Like I wasn't as good at my job than like you said, my male counterparts, just because I was also giving birth to babies. And, maybe I should be a teacher instead, because then I'd have my summers off. That was literally something a colleague said to me. So, just a very different time. And I do agree. Like, you know what? We need to be our own advocates. Who's going to do it if we don't do it? And, I can imagine that a pharmaceutical company such as yours, FemmePharma, being run by a woman operates very differently than, a pharmaceutical company that is owned and run by a man. So I fully agree with you on everything that you said. So tell us a little bit about FemmePharma.
So FemmePharma was started as a prescription pharmaceutical company. And I always call us FemmePharma 1, 2, 3, because there was FemmePharma 1, and FemmePharma 1 was the company that I started right after I left Big Pharma.
Okay.
And we were developing prescription pharmaceuticals for women for diseases and disorders that disproportionately affect them, that were really could be impacted by what I call targeted regional delivery. And believe it or not, this is a man who asked the question, well, does regional mean like the geography? Like, is this for like the mid-Atlantic, like for Pennsylvania, Delaware, and Virginia? I'm like, no. So if it's in your pelvic and reproductive region of the body, then you should confine the drug to that area. Yeah. And not have it enter systemic circulation and cause all sorts of adverse events. So you want to confine it as much as possible. So we focused on conditions like endometriosis and overactive bladder and fibrocystic breast condition. And we continued to write patents and get them issued, which was great. Clinical trial work. We started our clinical trial work, preclinical work in some particular drug candidates, but clinical work in others. And 5 years into it, we were asked if we were interested in being sold. It was a multinational. So I had shareholders, and I sold the first company. So that was on I think like a Wednesday. And on Thursday, I rehired everybody, and we started FemmePharma 2.
Great. Awesome.
And kept going. And we had really smart attorneys. I'm going to do a shout out to Manya Deer, who was with Morgan Lewis and Bacchius, who was the lead person on the transaction. And they did a phenomenal job negotiating this and carving out a lot of our intellectual property and other rights so that we could continue on, because she knew I was pretty young and I, had ambition to keep going. So that was FemmePharma 2 was started, and we continued our work on prescription pharmaceutical products. And then along the way, it became pretty obvious that there was a need for women particularly women who were ineligible or weren't interested in prescription products, notably hormone replacement therapy, to find options for them that were developed with the same care that we used when we developed our prescription products, and also met them where they were. So I will use the example of the 8 years I spent on the Living Beyond Breast Cancer Board, and that really was my light bulb moment, because I met so many different women who were survivors and thrivers, and they went into chemical or surgical menopause.
Yeah.
And it doesn't happen gradually like those of us who go into natural menopause, where you have perimenopause, you have symptoms, sometimes they get worse. They fluctuate.
Ebb and flow, yep.
This was really, you are in menopause. They want to shut down the production of estrogen to the greatest extent possible. For some of these women, they had their ovaries removed. And they were struggling. And I had the opportunity to hear some of their stories. And we said, you know what, this is a good opportunity. But why shouldn't they have the best possible, most innovative, and most aesthetically acceptable products.
Right.
So remembering that we developed drugs that were prescription and we treated conditions of the pelvic and reproductive organs, our technology naturally lent itself to doing a product for vaginal atrophy and vaginal dryness. And so we took the technology and know-how and developed a very elegant way in which to deliver a product that was highly effective, relatively safe, and made without hormones, which we ultimately got FDA cleared. And it's now our Mia Vita personal lubricant and vaginal moisturizer, and its companion, the Intimate Skin Moisturizer. So those became the two lead products for what is now FemmePharma Consumer Healthcare, the sister company to our prescription company.
Oh, that's amazing. That's so great. And then that was 2 and 3, right?
Yes, so that's the third company is Consumer.
Wonderful. So, and that's wonderful. So it's an option that's available out there without a prescription to consumers, which is wonderful because it's nice to be able to have a solution that you don't always have to see your doctor for, because as we know, unfortunately, a lot of women aren't really getting the solutions that they need from their physicians, unfortunately. So again, that's why advocating for yourself, doing your own research, education, knowing that these products exist out there, and being able to purchase them yourself to treat. And it's not a pharmaceutical, it's natural, so it's amazing.
Yeah. We look at women differently than probably what the industry does. And what we do is we examine women at various life stages, and we examine what are the symptoms they're experiencing, and how does that match up with what we've learned about them. So we do a lot of market research. I'm a big believer in asking the customer. So throughout my career and throughout the infancy, and then as we've grown up in FemmePharma, we've continued to do more and more market research so that we can understand how to best, we always say we deliver the difference, because the difference is we actually heard you. We listened to women and we developed products that they wanted and needed with the right ingredients, with the right configuration. So look, nobody wants to put a suppository in their vagina and sit for an hour and wait for it to melt.
No.
I'm sorry. Yeah. And by the way, I don't know about you, but I didn't want to have to wear a diaper because I had bladder leakage or because my personal lubricant was 5 grams of material to leak out all over my bed sheets. That's just awful. Not the way I envisioned perimenopause or menopause.
Right. So I'm curious. I know, you've been developing products for all of these years, doing market research for all of these years, asking women these questions. Has the narrative from women, has that changed? Because obviously the conversation now in the last several years has become more and more vocal, which is an amazing thing. And I think it's awesome that we're here on this podcast talking about vaginal dryness. And it's amazing that women are talking about menopausal symptoms and trying to find solutions. And because hopefully, for the next generation, they will start getting treated in their late 30s and early 40s and understand their bodies and what's happening to their bodies way more than we did. But I'm just curious, in the market research conversations, have you been hearing the same thing from women, the same narrative for all of these years? And it's just now for us, it's on more of a, national or global platform?
Yes. So we generally, over time, even from the first company, what we heard was, I'm not being heard, I'm not being listened to. And it didn't matter whether you were a woman in your reproductive age group cohort, because remember, we've been developing drugs for conditions like endometriosis, which affect young women. And it's not well diagnosed, takes a long time to get the right diagnosis. Same thing with breast condition, fibrocystic breast condition. Women are often dismissed. They're told to wear a tight bra, to stop drinking caffeine. I'm sorry, but if you have fibrocystic breast condition, you probably also need to have an ultrasound, and women weren't weren't being offered these options. They are now because they've become more vocal. But over time, we have continued to hear frustration from women, because one of the things that happens is that you have a celebrity brand that launches, and the conversation is, well, they did this because they know there are a lot of us.
Yeah.
And this is all about greed and avarice, making money off this massive audience. And look, in order to be able to do good research and good work, you have to have resources, which means that you either have to generate revenues or you have to raise money, or both. And so by no means do we do this as a nonprofit organization.
Right.
However, the why we do it is very different. So we did this. This has always been, at least for me, a passion project because of what I said earlier on in the podcast. Women deserve more than they were receiving. They deserve products that are well designed. Yes, we spent a lot of money getting our product FDA cleared. Not every company does that.
Right.
So they skirt the issue, they over-promote, and they don't follow regulatory guidelines. And yes, women still buy their products because there's a celebrity who's standing up there saying, oh, you know what? I have menopause. I'm in menopause, or I have endometriosis. Buy my product. Well, if it's a great product, no problem with that. But is that your reason to believe? Is your reason to believe because that person had a show on TV?
Right. Yeah, and I totally. And I really do think that, the conversation, I mean, I've been doing this podcast for the last 5 years. In 2020, I couldn't find anybody to talk about menopause. I was going through it, and I was miserable, and I couldn't even find someone to treat me, but I was looking for solutions, and I was looking for someone to even just commiserate with. With my background in nursing and in pharma, I knew what was happening to my body. I just couldn't find any help. So the conversation was very different 5 years ago than it is today on social media. I mean, in the media in general, even, in mainstream media. NBC Today Show is talking about menopause all the time. We didn't see that 5 years ago. And so obviously when the market shifts in this way, there are going to be a lot of people that are trying to take advantage of and take a piece of the pie of this huge market, because it is. And the amount of products that I see that people are trying to spin for perimenopause and menopause, I'm always like, oh my, sometimes I'm just like, I can't even believe this. So I always do say, I think that it is consumer beware. And you have to really do your homework. You have to take referrals from friends, ask around, ask your tribe, ask your community, your menopause, what are you using? What is working for you? Because you have to really go to trusted sources. You can't just listen to social media. And by the way, if you did listen to social media about how we should be managing our menopausal symptoms and what we should be doing, you would be doing something different every day, because there's people that are black and white and do this, don't do this, do that, don't do that. I mean, I don't know how some women aren't just literally driving themselves absolutely out of their mind with all of the advice that's being thrown at us, because it's not all correct and it's not all accurate. And I feel like, we're all bio-individual. All of our bodies are different. Yes, I think you need a team of people to help you and get through every stage of your life, right? We needed people to help us get through adolescence, people to help us get through the birthing years. Now we need a team to help us get through perimenopause and menopause. But buyer beware, you have to be really cautious about who you're listening to, who you're taking advice from, who you're listening to on social media, and the products that you use, and making sure that they are effective and worth what you're paying for them. So I really do agree with you. But in that same sense, I don't believe that everyone who's trying to sell you something is doing it because they're looking just to make a buck off of people. I think there are truly people who have started companies as passion projects. They're looking for solutions. They're innovative, just like as if it was a technology company. You know, some of these supplements that are being made, some of the medicines, the treatments that are available to us are life-changing for women.
Yes.
And yeah, so I agree with everything that you said. And again, I think it's just watch out, be aware that you might be being sold to. So make sure you do your homework and investigate, you know?
Absolutely. It's about empowering with knowledge. That's the other aspect of our business. So we have a large following on social media. Yes, we put out good content. We believe in making certain that our content that we put in our blog posts comes with its erudite references that are used. We don't hire just anyone to work with us to do writing. Right. These are individuals who have great expertise, but they are tasked with give me erudite publications, thoroughly vet your research. I read everything that goes out there on our blog. And then on our Love Me Avita podcast, which is also another way, as you know, having your own podcast, to empower women with knowledge. We invite individuals who are knowledgeable. These are generally healthcare practitioners who have credentials. We also have a track because we want to elevate women. So we have a track, Women Inspiring Nonconformity. So women like you, Chrissy.
Love that.
Really cool things to help women to make some of these decisions. Yeah. And it really is your individual decision. It is your pregnancy, your puberty, your postmenopause, right? And we cover the gamut. And we do cover the gamut. I mean, as a company, we think about every phase of life. So when we talk about postpartum depression, it's not one size fits all. Right. So if cognitive behavioral therapy is what works for you, then that's what you need to pursue. You don't need to take a mood supplement if that's not the right approach. If you are having issues with sleep, do a diagnostic study. Maybe you don't need Ambien. I'll use, I hate to use product names, so I'll say you don't need to use a prescription product.
Right.
But the caveat is, if you are suffering and you see your psychiatrist and your psychiatrist prescribes something because the consequences of not having that sleep are worse than taking that prescription product, obviously that's your go-to.
Absolutely.
And that's why the comment that you made earlier about individualized ways in which to address these is really important. But where do you get the information? So the other frustration that we hear is that my HCP doesn't understand me, doesn't spend enough time with me.
Yes. Yes. I mean, we feel that. Just, I feel like everybody feels that. It's unbelievable.
And that's a tragedy. And it's, look, I'm going to give the HCPs some grace because I know many HCPs and have worked with them. They've been investigators on our clinical trials. And when you're seeing 35 or 40 women a day, it is very difficult to keep your head on straight, much less to get to the bathroom, have a snack, and you can't spend the time.
Yeah.
This is a function of a couple of different things. During the pandemic, we know what those issues were, but it was pre-pandemic and it's post-pandemic.
Right.
Physicians are being tasked like they are factory workers. Produce until you can't produce any longer. Wring that rag dry, squeeze the lemon until you get the last drop out of it.
Right.
I mean, these are human beings.
Right.
So
Exactly.
I give them grace. Then in medical school, they, everything was based on the default male.
Right. Yeah.
So again,
absolutely. And it's not, and that's the whole thing. It's like, it is real. That's why I think we are a generation away from this really, shifting, because it's not the physicians themselves or the healthcare practitioners. It's the way that our medical healthcare system really has been built and the way that it's being continued to build. And being built with like specialists working in silos, especially for me, like it didn't really dawn on me until I hit perimenopause and every system in my body blew up. And I was literally going to every single specialist, but every single specialist was giving me different solutions and really nothing to actually fix the root cause. I mean, when you're looking at holistic healthcare and you're looking at someone as a human being and you are thinking about trying to get to the root cause, I mean, there's really no better example than perimenopause because, just supplementing a smidge of estrogen can really help to cure an amazing amount of symptoms, which is unbelievable. So again, but they're not really, each specialist, when you go in, they want to solve your problem. That's what they're taught to do. That's what their mission is. That's their why. They want to help you. They want to solve your problem, but they're solving it by giving you usually a prescription medication that is very likely to have several other side effects that cause other issues, but you're not thinking that unless, again, you're educating yourself and really understanding what that's doing to your body.
Absolutely. We looked at the example of sleep, and we were over medicating women. So many of the prescription sleep products, which were hypnotic sedatives, well, they worked to get women into sleep. They are absolutely habit forming. And if you had studied these products, particularly the ones prior to 1993, and there were many that are still out there, then you end up over prescribing and over medicating. Now, your HCP didn't do the clinical work, so how would she know? She wouldn't.
Right.
Then we look at other diseases and disorders, like the autoimmune diseases.
Yes.
And sometimes the side effects are worse than the condition itself, right? You can use the example of drugs that cause liver toxicity or they increase risk of dementia. I mean, there's so many issues.
Exactly.
So we like to take the most benign approach possible. Sometimes that's not possible.
Yeah.
But if you're a physician and you have your tear pad in front of you and you have 15 minutes with this patient, you've read the chart. Maybe you haven't read the chart. Maybe your nurse or nurse practitioner, it gave you the synopsis, and now it's all electronic, right? So
right. Exactly.
Maybe the easiest thing to do is to write that prescription because you want to solve the problem. Let's face it.
Of course.
Problem.
Absolutely. And by the way, the patient wants the problem solved, and the patient in the moment is not thinking, oh, what are these other side effects that are going to cause? Most likely, they're really just thinking about solving the problem that they came into that office with. So, it really is, it's a conundrum that we're all dealing with as patients with a lot of symptoms, not just perimenopause, with a lot of different symptoms. I'm curious for you to ask you this. So, as being in this space for so many years and really seeing it pre-WHI study, post, now we're past the WHI study and debunking some of the, a lot of those findings. What is something that has been the biggest surprise to you, like in the last couple years about like the menopausal space? That is like something that's come to light and that has like maybe surprised you because you've been in the space for so long.
Sure. So I know a lot about the WHI because I was with the company, the big pharma company that provided the active pharmaceutical ingredient. And there was, the study design. I know people talk about the study design, it was flawed and so forth. And so I'm going to say something that's kind of controversial. And it's not because I want to defend my former employer. Anytime you do research, you learn things.
Sure.
We should be pleased that we learned what we learned. For example, we learned in the WHI study that if you're a woman with an intact uterus, right, you needed to add progesterone. So hence Premarin, right? So I'm using the name of the drug. You can look it up, but the bottom line is,
I think at this point everybody knows.
Everybody knows. So
everybody knows.
You needed to add progesterone, right? Because otherwise you have an increased risk for endometrial carcinoma, endometrial cancer.
Right.
Okay?
And
so
now that's becoming the gold standard for today. So that's
we
learned that.
So that's what we learned. Second thing we learned is that there's an optimal time if you are a candidate for hormone replacement. And I put the big if you are a candidate, The optimal time is not postmenopausally. And there are many reasons for that. It's not to say that every woman is not, that postmenopausal is not a candidate, but the benefit has to outweigh the risk. And so if you're a woman who has had thromboembolic complications, who has had a history of malignancy, especially hormone-dependent malignancy, in consultation with your healthcare provider, perhaps it's not the best thing for you to do at postmenopausally. So what I'm going to say here is that we should stop indicting research, because whenever we do that, people that are less knowledgeable say, "Oh, see, big pharma screwed it up. We need to switch this up. It's really dangerous to invest in women's health research." That's not the goal. The goal is we need to do the research. We need to do a better job of inclusivity. And I know these days that's not a great word, but inclusivity means different patient populations, women of color, Black, brown, different age group cohorts. We need the data. We don't have the data.
We do not. And
that is so important if we are to do the good work and continue what we learned from the WHI. There needs to be the next phase and the next phase after that. We need to look at dosage forms. Is it better to do it topically, systemically? What's the right dosage? We talk about things like testosterone. I know that there are HCPs that prescribe testosterone. We need the data. They don't have the tools. So again, I'm a big believer, get the data. And get the data in diverse populations.
Yes, and I do think that we are getting better and better at that. There's more and more privately funded studies going on for women. And I think also the people that have been looking at the study and parceling through the study, I think understand that it wasn't the flawed study design. It was really interpretation of certain segments of data. But there was so much good in that WHI study that came out. And it really was the first study that was studying that many women.
32,000.
Was it 32,000?
Massive number of women.
Massive number of women. And so with that, a study with 32,000 women, we did get a lot of great data from it. But it was really that the subset of the data and how it was analyzed, and really the media at the time picking it up and running with that story that created an entire frenzy for truly a generation of women.
Yes.
So there's so many different pieces to that puzzle that created that insanity of what it was, including the media.
And I think we need to not over promote, though. That's what so my concern is, just as we had the hysteria that was created, we have to be careful that we're not over promoting this as, the panacea. Because if you recall back in the days when we first had, systemic hormone replacement therapy.
Right.
It was like mother's little helper.
Yes.
Right? It did everything. It worked on, if you were a woman of a certain age and you weren't on HRT, you would probably shrivel up. You would stop being sexual. Your hair would fall out. You would lose your brain. Now, we know that there are estrogen receptors in every part of our bodies, and we know that there is a beneficial impact. But again, coming right back to where we started, it is based on the individual.
Yes, exactly.
And her specific issues, her health history, and her goals.
And her goals. Absolutely. And her symptoms and what she's tried, to relieve her symptoms already. There's just, it really is so bio-individual. And I also think that HRT is, again, just one piece of the puzzle in menopausal care. I think there are, it may not be right for everyone. It may not work for everybody. Everyone may not need it. but it is one piece of a puzzle that has many pieces that really reflect your postmenopausal wellness, your longevity. It's many different things. It's not just HRT. So I agree with you in the sense that I think thinking that it is nothing is a magic pill. Nothing.
Right. And by the way, because you are using HRT, it doesn't obviate your, opportunities to try other things in conjunction with your hormone replacement therapy. Someone asked me whether something was contraindicated. And I said, well, if you are using HRT, but you're still having sleep problems, there's no reason why you can't consider a supplement that is known to help you to get better sleep. And I would use a natural product, right?
Right.
So that could be maybe because you have hot flashes and you're on systemic HRT and you have alleviation of hot flashes, maybe the sleep abates, right? You're no longer waking up in the middle of the night with the hot flash. But if it doesn't, maybe you need something else. Same thing with an issue like vaginal dryness.
Yeah.
If you need a little help from your friend,
you
can get a personal lubricant and you can use that when you're having intercourse, or if you want to do it every day, you can do it every day. It's not contraindicated. See what works for you and make the best decision for your life. That's why I call it Mia Vita, my life. It's your life.
I love it.
It's about your life.
Exactly. And I do think with vaginal dryness specifically as one of the symptoms, well, sexual dysfunction in general as a symptom of perimenopause and menopause, I think it's one that's really not discussed a lot. I think women tend to not want to talk about it. I don't know why. Maybe because it's obviously a very private, intimate subject, but even amongst friends. And I do feel like it's, from what I hear from clients, it is one of the most common symptoms. And it really can affect so many, besides like UTIs and your bladder and sexual function and painful sex and all of these things. It can affect you in so many ways. And if sex is painful, you're not going to want to have sex with your partner. And if you don't want to have sex with your partner, that's obviously going to trickle into other aspects of your life. And it just keeps going and going. So, I think for women to understand that there are products out there, like Mia Vita, that are specifically for personal lubricant that can help with making sex feel better, you feel better. It, like you said, it rejuvenates all of the tissue. I don't think everyone understands that there are options like that out there that you don't have to go to your doctor for. You can get without a prescription. And it's a problem. It's a big problem in perimenopause and menopause.
It most certainly is. It's part of the genitourinary syndrome of menopause.
Yes.
And unfortunately, anytime we talk about sex or, having sex, I remember in the early days of the consumer company, we had thought about doing a refer a friend. It bombed. Nobody wanted to refer their friend. And I had, and I had this moment where I was at a cocktail party and we all had some wine and these women are joking and they said, do you have sex? I don't have sex. I don't have sex. Women of a certain age, nobody's having sex.
Right.
And so after a couple of glasses of wine, I said, okay, is it because your husband or your partner is wearing, because it could be same sex, your partner is like really unattractive, like wearing black socks and sandals or worse?
Oh my God.
Let's face it. You know what? We know that happens too, right?
Of course. Let's get that.
It wasn't lack of interest. It was because it hurt.
Yeah.
And I always use the analogy that if you take your kid to the pediatrician, and every time you take your kid to the pediatrician, they get an injection, you pull in the parking lot and it's like, oh, they scream.
Right.
Same thing with your partner rolls over. It's like, how about tonight, honey? And you're like, no.
Exactly.
But it's also about other things. You talked about, women who are athletes and they can't sit on a bicycle because it hurts because they're raw, right?
Yeah.
And so, they try to find different products. Maybe you're celibate. Nuns get vaginal dryness too. I hate to tell you that.
Yeah, no, I believe it. Of course.
Dryness. And they're not having insertive intercourse, which means that they're also experiencing the vagina closing on itself.
Yeah.
So do they need something? They do, but it is, unfortunately, it's stigmatized.
Right.
And it's sad that it is stigmatized, because if you have dry mouth, you're going to use something for your dry mouth. Same thing for your dry eyes.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, we're here to destigmatize it.
Yes.
We are, and we are very fortunate that there are amazing women like you who are not only just destigmatizing it, but out there creating solutions for us, so that we just can feel better and live our lives in a much healthier and happier way. So thank you for that. So tell my listeners where they can find you, or where they can find Mia Vita, more importantly.
So we're based in Wayne, Pennsylvania. We do not have a pharmacy, but we do have a website. And
Awesome.
The website is FemmePharma.com, spelled FemmePharma. So FemmePharma.com. And we have wonderful podcast called the Love Mia Vita podcast. And we're hoping that Chrissy is going to be one of our guests.
Absolutely. I would love to. Thank you.
Great information on our blogs, but check out our website and explore the store.
I love it. I love it. Well, thank you so much for being on today. We are so grateful to have you here, that you're a suburban warrior out there, really, like I said, finding amazing solutions for us. So guys, be sure to check out FemmePharma.com. We will make sure we link the website in our show notes. And you can find me at Suburban Warrior on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and you can listen to the podcast anywhere you get your podcast. But please leave us a review. Let us know what you thought of the episode. Drop a comment. We would love to hear from you. And it really helps to hear your comments and hear your reviews, because that way this podcast can get to other women who need to hear it as well. We want to make sure we're spreading this information as widely as possible, because we don't want any women to suffer through midlife, and make sure that they are finding the solutions that they need. We are building a community of empowerment, and we are happy that you're a part of it. So again, thank you so much for being here. We'll be back next week with another amazing suburban warrior here to share her story with you.